My name is Craig C. White, and I have a Bible prophecy website called High Time to Awake, and that's hightimetoawake.com. I think I'm in the right place because since Bill Randles asked me to speak tonight, I've been searching for Bill Randles stuff. I've been watching a lot of his YouTubes and reading his blog and a lot of his articles that he writes and interviews that he does. And he talks about very similar things that I talk about as far as Bible prophecy goes, Turkey and the Islamic nations and around the Middle East and the melding together of Islam under a caliphate, that kind of stuff. So I think you guys are prepared for what I'm about to say. Because I think even if you are prepared, it might get a little uncomfortable, all right? I hope not to be too radical, but I think I have some good things to say. The nearer that Turkey gets to the Golan Heights, the nearer that Jesus will get to the Golan Heights. Yeah. Now, that's my observation. Okay, this is not cast in stone as far as the church at large is concerned, but I'm thinking it's true more each day. Okay, that is a map of Syria. And the Turkish army right now is at the very northern end of that. This is a Google map drive directions from Idlib, Syria, which is in northern Syria, all the way down to the Golan Heights of Israel. All right? That's a quick drive on a highway straight through to Golan Heights. Not hard to get there. So that's about 300 miles from Idlib to the Golan Heights at this point. Jeremiah chapter 49, verses 23 through 27. That talks about the destruction of Damascus. I hope a lot of you guys are familiar with that, right? That's a popular theme amongst Christians. They know that Damascus will be destroyed. It's also in Isaiah chapter 17. And in this short little passage, it talks about the destruction of Damascus. It says, concerning Damascus, Hamath is confounded and Arpad. Where are Hamath and Arpad, and why should we care? Right? Hamah is still called Hamah today. It's the 5th largest city in Syria. You can see Hamah right here, right? The Turkish army is now in Syria. They're in Idlib. Can you see Idlib? Okay, that's a province. Hamah is a city and a governorate, they call it, or a province. Aleppo, you've heard all about Aleppo in the news. That's a province and a city. The Turkish army is in Idlib, and they just got there about 3 weeks ago, or maybe a month ago. Did you hear about the Sochi conference between Russia, Iran, and Turkey? And Iran and Turkey, Russia gave Turkey permission to bring 25,000 troops into Idlib, and they're there. But not only are they there, they're above Aleppo, above Arpad, which is called Tell Rifaat today. It actually means Rose Hill, but Arpad, and the Turkish army is just above them in Azaz, which is in Syria, and Kilis, which is the Turkish city just above it. And the Turkish army has a lot of troops there. And you probably haven't seen this in the news, but even yesterday and the day before, the Turkish army is amassing the largest Turkish force in their history. Yeah, on the Turkish-Syrian border. And they're already in Turkey and Syria anyway. But in the news, you may have heard about Afrin or Afrin. That's a region, and it's also a town. It's right around Tell Rifaat. It's a Kurdish area in northwestern Syria. And Turkish President Erdogan wants to go in and push the Syrian Kurdish forces out because the Syrian Kurds are trying to develop their own state, autonomous state in Syria, and Turkey too. So Turkish President Erdogan has said, we're going to get rid of them. We're going in. The U.S., just in the past few days, there's been a lot of drama playing out. The U.S. said, we're going to support the Kurds in Syria. And the Turkish President Erdogan said, we will strangle the forces before you have a chance to build them. That's our ally talking to us like that. Anyway, in Arpad, in Tell Rifaat, that's the key Kurdish town in Syria that Turkey wants to conquer and get the Kurds out of. Afrin is a region, but Tell Rifaat is the key town. And Turkish President Erdogan has vowed to go town by town, starting with Afrin, until he gets rid of the Kurds there. So he is planning with a very large force to get rid of the Kurds in Tell Rifaat. And in Hamah, the Syrian army is in Hamah, and Al-Qaeda controls the Idlib province. And the Syrian government controls the Hamah government, or the province. And Al-Qaeda in Idlib for the past 5 or 6 years has been fighting with the Syrian army in Hamah, and the Syrian army in Hamah is now winning. So they're pushing back the Al-Qaeda forces in Idlib. And for the first time this week, Turkish forces, or Turkish-supported forces, have been fighting the Syrian army in Hamah. All right? Concerning Damascus, Hamah will be confounded in Arpad because they've heard evil tidings of a coming invasion or something horrible, and they're terrified. These things are beginning to happen. And this isn't something I discovered this week. I've been telling people about this for 7 years from the scripture, and it's beginning to happen. I'll tell you why I told them for 7 years. Because in Ezekiel chapter 38, it talks about the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. That chief prince will lead Libya, Sudan, and Iran into Israel. Okay? And I said, well, everyone said, well, that chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, that's Russia because it sounds like Moscow. And I'm like, I don't know about that. And so I just took a simple reading of the text. I went to my concordance and said, what do these words mean? The chief prince in Hebrew means primary governor, and Meshech and Tubal were brothers, and so was Magog. They were sons of Japheth. They're in the genealogies in the Bible, and they're the original princes that were set over provinces in what we'd call Turkey today. So the chief prince is the primary governor, and at the time, Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan was in power. And chief prince, you couldn't say prime minister in a better way. It's primary governor. Yeah, so I'm saying, all right, well, this guy sounds like he could be the invader of Israel. And the thing is, then I went, because the Syrian war was going on in the early stages, and I said, well, let's see who's fighting in Syria. The Free Syrian Army, you've probably heard of them. You've heard about moderate rebels and, the radical rebels and all that kind of stuff. The Free Syrian Army is not Syrian in any way, shape, or form. It's mostly Libyan. Okay? Iran is in Syria. The Iranian army is helping Assad, and Hezbollah is helping the Iranian army and Assad. Iran is there. And the only other one that we're looking for is Sudan. And Sudan is there too. All right? Now, they may be there in greater numbers soon. But do you remember, maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, in the news, hearing reports about all the jihadists that were just flooding into Syria through Turkey? You remember hearing those reports? Those mostly were Northern African Al-Qaeda Muslims, right? Sunni Muslims. So that's Sudan. If you look on your map, that's Sudan and Libya primarily, all right? They're getting paid. They're saying, hey, we're going to have a war. Come join us. And they just came in droves. I saw movies of them crossing the border all with their weapons and just flooding into Syria. So all our people that Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 5 lists are fighting in Syria. And Turkey is fighting in Syria now. And Turkey, the prime minister of Turkey, the president of Turkey, I think is the chief prince or primary governor among the provinces of Turkey. Okay, so I think we may have identified Magog because Turkish President Erdogan has vowed to wipe out Tell Rifaat, and he's also vowed to remove Syrian President Assad from power in Damascus. As a matter of fact, in a speech maybe 6 months ago, he said the sole reason why the Turkish army has entered Syria, because they had a little bit in the Euphrates Shield operation, if you heard about that, in the very northern part of Syria. The sole reason was to remove Assad from power in Damascus. So these things are happening, and we're being told that they're going to happen. So what I'm saying is that Turkey is already beginning to do this. In Jeremiah chapter 49, it says that the Hamah and Tell Rifaat will hear evil tidings, and will be terrified. So, we ought to be able to hear these things in the news and find out about them. Either, the Turkish army is coming at that point, and they're there now. I saw a movie last night, a video of the troops and the buses just carrying the troops in for an hour and a half, bringing them down to the Syrian border. Turkey has been amassing weapons on the Syrian border for about 6 years. I know maybe 5-6 years ago, they already had 54,000 troops on the Syrian border. Yeah, so they've been at this for a long time, and for about the last week, they've been really shipping them down right next to the border to go in. So it's going to happen soon. I think so far they've been going back and forth in the UN trying to get them not to go in, but they want to. And so try to simplify this, Hamah, Tell Rifaat will be invaded or terrified or terrorized or whatever you want to say. And then we may as well read this. In Jeremiah, the residents of Damascus will flee. All right, let's see here. Jeremiah chapter 49, verses 23 through 27. Concerning Damascus, Hamath is confounded and Arpad, for they have heard evil tidings. They are faint-hearted. There is sorrow on the sea. It cannot be quiet. I broke down the words where it says that there is sorrow on the sea, and it seems to me that it's saying that the nations will be in upheaval about Turkey going into Syria and fighting the Kurds and fighting the Syrian army, which they have not done yet. So that's just my observation. It might mean something different, but Damascus is waxed feeble. That means that Damascus has grown old and is getting ready to die. And turneth herself to flee, and fear hath seized on her, anguish and sorrow have taken her as a woman in travail. How is the city, this is God saying, speaking at this point, how is the city of praise not left, the city of my joy? Therefore her young men shall fall in the streets, and all the men of war shall be cut off in that day, saith the Lord of hosts. And I will kindle a fire in the wall of Damascus, and it shall consume the palaces of Ben-Hadad. The palaces of Ben-Hadad is just a term that identifies where the king ruled Damascus. And that is another good point. In where it says, how is the city of praise not left, the city of my joy? He's actually identifying God is identifying the oldest part of the city of Damascus, and that's called Old Damascus. It's where the capital of Damascus is today. So I know we've been watching the news about Damascus and Syria in general, and there's a lot of devastation everywhere. But Jeremiah is identifying that neighborhood where the oldest buildings are. You'll have to read my article to break down the words, but some of these words mean the city of renown, or the ancient buildings that I love, is what God's telling us there. So, and Damascus is, it says it is the oldest continually inhabited city in the world. And one day, at least that center part of it is going to be rubble. And then in Ezekiel chapter 38, it talks about all the forces that are fighting in Syria now coming into Israel. And that's Ezekiel chapter 38, Battle of Gog and Magog. You may have heard that term. I think is going to be in the northern part, in the Golan Heights and maybe into the Galilee of Israel. I should put that first map back up, see if there's any Bible scholars up here. Does that path ring any bells to any Bible historians? Probably. No, it's the Assyrian attack of northern Israel in 734 BC. The Antichrist is associated with the Assyrian in the Bible. I'll point you to Isaiah chapter 10. There's other passages. But in Isaiah chapter 10, God is talking to Israel, and he says, I will bring the Assyrian on the disobedient nation, or on Israel, and I'll use him as my arm, or as my tool to judge Israel, and which is not pleasant. And this happened in it happened twice, 734 BC and 701 BC. At the end of Isaiah chapter 10, in the first verse of 11, Jesus Christ is taking his seat on his throne in Jerusalem. Well, that certainly didn't happen in 734 BC or 701 BC, right? So this has end-time implications. And I've read articles and commentaries from people, good Bible scholars, for the last several hundred years, who point to the Assyrian being associated with the Antichrist. And they always struggle with it. They say, well, that means he's from Assyria. And I hate to say it, but most people don't even know where Assyria is, but most Bible teachers. Assyria is northern Iraq. ISIS, the ISIS state of Iraq and Syria, that is a revived Assyrian state. That's Assyria. All right, they had an empire, but the state is northern Iraq and into Syria. Not really very big. Anyway, they try to guess where he's from. He's from Assyria. Well, the Assyrian Empire went into Turkey and Syria, so maybe he's from Turkey, maybe he's from Syria. Well, let's just throw where he's from right out the window and say, what is he going to do? The Antichrist is going to do the same things that the Assyrian kings did, and I'll tell you what they did. In the first attack on Israel, they conquered Syria and conquered Damascus. Then, as a matter of fact, Israel asked them to help fight against Syria. But as soon as they conquered Damascus, then they went into northern Israel. The Assyrians attacked northern Israel. So there's two phases. Conquer Syria, attack northern Israel. Then the Assyrians came back in 701 BC, about 30-some years later, and they attacked southern Israel. Those two invasions are models for Ezekiel chapter 38 and Ezekiel chapter 39. They're models for a Turkish-led invasion into northern, first conquering Syria, and Turkish President Erdogan has vowed to do that. He wants to put Muslim Brotherhood leadership in Syria. And then coming into Israel. The Golan Heights are only 30 miles from Damascus. Right? So You'll have Al-Qaeda from Libya. You'll have Al-Qaeda from Sudan and maybe even Iraq. There's still some ISIS people in the area. You'll have Hezbollah from Iran. You'll have all sorts of Turkish troops. You'll have the Iranian army after Damascus, which it really isn't going to be a very difficult task to bomb Damascus until there's nothing left, because it's a pretty small area at this point that hasn't been wrecked. Anyway, you're going to have, I don't know how many people, 700,000 people, crazy people with guns. What do we do now? Let's just go home, call it a day, right? No, let's go into Israel. And you know, they've already been, well, you may have been, remember this from the news maybe 6 months ago. Everyone was talking, give the Golan Heights back to Syria. Remember hearing that in the news? That was a big push. And Turkish President Erdogan was the chief, pusher. He gathered all of the Islamic nations, which he's the head of in the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. He's the head now. So he got everyone together and said, we must take the Golan Heights for Islam. And they also got together when Trump said, hey, we're putting an embassy in Jerusalem. He said, all right, Iran and Sudan and Libya and everybody else, we're going to take Jerusalem back for Islam. Should I just say it? I think Turkish President Erdogan is the Antichrist. All right? Yeah. And that's not even the craziest part of this, all right? There's a very little known passage in Nahum. When's the last time you studied Nahum? No? Okay, been a while. Nahum is all about the destruction and the flooding of ancient Nineveh. Remember Jonah went to Nineveh? And God told him to say, you had 40 days and the city will be destroyed. Right? Think about that for a second. Jonah was a Hebrew prophet, right? Well, who was he sent to? He was sent to the Assyrians. He was sent to the Gentiles to tell them to basically to repent or else. Whatever prophet did that, right? I don't think anybody did. And they did repent, and they saved their city for a while. But about 150, 200 years later, the Assyrians were destroyed, and they were besieged by 3 armies: the Babylonians, Medes, and Persians, for 3 months. And then, this was in the middle of the summer in 612 BC. God sent rain. This is Iraq. This is desert storm territory. This is where it does not rain at all, 0. And the dew point is 0, or the humidity, no humidity in the summer. May, June, July, it rained and rained and rained and rained in 612 BC until the walls of the Tigris River, is built right on the Tigris River. The Tigris River raised and eroded the walls of Nineveh, which was a famous place for having tall walls and being a fortress. It eroded the walls and allowed the Babylonians, Medes, and Persians to go in and conquer and kill everybody. And after these 3 armies got in, mostly it was the Babylonians, but after they got in, they spent about 2 months and just took everything and just razed the place, and it was never inhabited after that. It was the Assyrian capital. It was the capital of the Assyrian Empire, and it was completely flattened. We didn't even know it existed until like 1950-something, and they finally found it. So the ruins of it lie in the middle of the city of Mosul. And so Nahum's all about the flooding and those armies, okay? Which I'm just going to have to tell you, the same thing except for the flood so far. The same armies attacked ISIS in Mosul. Mosul is Nineveh today. And that's this headquarters and hometown of al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS. Before there was ever ISIS, he was Al-Qaeda head in Mosul. And so anyway, the same armies attacked Mosul and got rid of ISIS, right? So I think that Nahum applies to now as well as it applies to Mosul in Iraq and the destruction by the armies. And there's some very gory details that have happened that Nahum talks about. But one of the biggest things that hasn't happened is it will be flooded. And do you guys know about the Mosul Dam? Yeah. There's a dam about 40 miles north of Mosul, and when we went in for Desert Storm, the Army Corps of Engineers said, this is the most dangerous dam in the world because the soil that it was built on is gypsum. It's like the stuff you make your wallboard out of. It's dissolving. Their foundations are dissolving. And there was a big scare about this maybe a year ago, and a year before that, and a year before that, and they're starting to talk about it again in the news. It's still a problem. But so anyway, it would be so easy for Mosul to flood. But here's the kicker. In Nahum, there's one section that has nothing to do with the flooding and destruction of ancient Nineveh. But it has, I think, everything to do with Jesus Christ coming in the air. And guess where he's going? The Golan Heights. What is that doing in the middle of Nahum? Right? It gives you willies. It's right there in front of you. Nahum, can you read that? Am I using the way? In Nahum chapter 1, verse 3 through 8. You've probably heard this. This is a nice poetic verse. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not acquit the wicked. The Lord hath his way in the whirlwind. That means he's coming in a tornado of wind, which he often does. And in the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. He rebuketh the sea and maketh it dry, and drieth up all the rivers. Bashan languisheth, and Carmel, and the flower of Lebanon languisheth. These are all areas right around the Golan Heights, in Syria, in Israel, and in Lebanon, right across that area. And it's saying that those areas are going to be dry, they're going to be burned. Jesus is coming in a fiery tornado, not necessarily with his feet on the ground, but passing over. And he doesn't say anything about any troops being there, but I think they're coming in Ezekiel chapter 38. So anyway, these places are going to be singed really badly. Who can stand before his indignation, and who can abide in the fierceness of his anger? His fury is poured out like fire, and the rocks are thrown down by him. This is Jesus Christ. And if you read Ezekiel chapter 38, this is at least one way that Jesus fights against the invaders that come in from Syria, I'm assuming, but the Turkish-led invaders, Libya, Sudan, and Iran. He fights against them with fire and brimstone and torrential rain and other things. This is describing a similar scenario. And then it goes on, his fury is poured out like fire, and the rocks are thrown down by him. When I read Ezekiel 38 for years, I'm like, where is this fire and brimstone coming from? I've never seen it come down from the sky, have you? But this in Nahum describes Jesus Christ churning up the land and the rocks and the bedrock, and that's fire and brimstone, right? So it's just a practical solution to where the fire and brimstone comes from. In this is interesting. In verse 7, the Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust in him. All right? Does that sound like maybe he's looking out for Christians? Does that sound like maybe that could be a rapture? A resurrection and rapture? It sounds like it could be to me. And there's other verses in Psalm 50. Maybe we can read that later. That's a similar scenario. But with an overrunning flood, he will make an utter end of the place thereof. Now he's talking about Nineveh, which is northern Iraq, which is Mosul today. And darkness shall pursue his enemies. And this word overrunning basically means water that covers something. And in 612 BC, the water did not cover the city. It eroded the walls until the armies were able to go in. And for 2 months after that, they were able to plunder the city. So it wasn't underwater. I mean, it was somewhat underwater. The gates were underwater. So this kind of describes water going right over the city. As a matter of fact, there's another verse that says that Nineveh or Mosul will look like a water reservoir for many days. And that's probably not something that happened in 612 BC, although I wasn't there. But, so are you guys following me?
Yeah.
Are you? So, you just recap. Well, you know what, while we're here, can you see the Psalm 50 okay? Oh yeah, there's Ezekiel 38 where he gives them fire and brimstone and stuff. And Psalm 50. Our God shall come and shall not keep silence. A fire shall devour before him. Does anyone ever think that this is how Jesus Christ will come? Yeah. He's not going to be particularly happy. Well, he might be happy to see you and me, but he's not going to be happy with Israel's enemies, I'll put it that way. A fire shall devour before him, and it shall be very tempestuous round about him. And that's talking about this whirlwind. You know, you read in the Bible sometimes where Jesus Christ will come in a cloud, or even when the Israelites were led by a cloud through the wilderness. That was Jesus Christ. And it's not a fluffy cloud with fat cherubs on it. It's a tornado. It's a pillar of clouds by day. It's a tornado. It's tempestuous. And that's one of the signs of Jesus Christ anyway. In chapter Psalm 50, verse 4, he shall call to the heavens from above and to the earth, that he may judge his people. Gather my saints unto me, those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. I'm not going to tell you I know exactly what that means, but it sounds similar to the other verse, that before he judges Israel and everyone that he made, all the Gentile nations, that he would preserve the church or Christians or believers. And Bill and I were talking earlier about pre-trib, post-trib, all that kind of stuff, mid-trib. You know, when do you believe the rapture is going to happen? This is what I'm leaning towards. I don't want to be completely dogmatic about it because there are other good reasons to think otherwise. But this is a scenario that we all can really watch and see what will happen. And I'm just going to toot my horn a little bit again. Like 7 years ago, I was writing about this stuff and saying that, hey, these nations are already in Syria. This means the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, that's the primary governor amongst the provinces of Turkey. And this prime minister Erdogan and the president Erdogan at this point, he wants to be the leader of a new Islamic union and of a new Islamic caliphate. He wants to take over the Islamic world and any other part of the world he can get his hands on. He's bad news. And so these nations that are listed in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 5, are fighting in Syria. If they destroy Damascus, or Turkey destroys Damascus, or somebody destroys Damascus, then they're 30 miles away from Israel, from the Golan Heights. And I try to just leave you with one little thing. I probably used my time up already. Okay. In Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 23 through 27, concerning Damascus, Hamath is confounded and Arpad, for they have heard evil tidings. They are faint-hearted. This is concerning Damascus. The destruction of Damascus begins in Hamah and Tell Rifaat. That's what it's called today. Arpad is called Tell Rifaat. It begins there, and it works its way southward. So the invader in Jeremiah isn't listed. You don't know who that is coming, but they're coming from that direction, and Turkey is where they're coming from. So that about sums it up. Let me throw you one little tidbit out here. A lot of people say, oh no, Russia's going to lead all the Islamic nations into Syria. And who knows, maybe they will, but I don't think so. This week, all the Al-Qaeda forces, except ISIS, but ISIS is already aligned with Turkey. But anyway, all the Al-Qaeda forces and other rebel forces in Syria just combined to form what they call the National Army, led by Turkey. They all just fell under Turkey's leadership. So now you have, that's not even the Free Syrian Army, these are other people. This is al-Nusra Front, which is the Al-Qaeda affiliate of Syria. All these Al-Qaeda groups and other rebel groups have just combined. It's about a 25,000-man army, and they're taking direction from Turkey and being armed and everything else. Plus, Turkey has the Free Syrian Army, and they're just rebels who they're just importing as fast as they can, pretty much. They're coming from the Turkish border into Syria. And then you have 25,000 Turkish troops and Free Syrian Army troops that they've been allowed in Idlib, and now you have all these, I don't know how many thousands, 50, 100,000, I don't even know how many, who are lined up on the Turkish border ready to come in. All right? They're all there. This is a major invasion of Syria. Turkey wants to be the controller of Syria, and they're doing it. So it's something that we can watch. Watch as Turkey finally gets into Syria. Well, they're already there, but in force, more force, into Hamah. When you start hearing about them fighting the Syrian army in Hamah, start hearing about them either negotiating or fighting the Kurds in Tell Rifaat. I don't know what exactly they're going to do. And then coming down into Damascus is something you can watch happening. And I've seen this afar off, and it seems like it just gets closer and closer and closer, and that doesn't really, doesn't really happen, but it's forming. Yeah. So keep your eye on Hamah, Tell Rifaat, Damascus, and if they get that far, remember I told you about Golan Heights. And if you get that far, remember I told you about Jesus Christ coming on the Golan Heights. Is this important stuff?
Oh, amen.
Yeah, it's important stuff. So anyway, thank you. Hope I didn't take too much time.